Hey everyone, it's Jay again, picking up right back where I left off on Dead Frontier, Outbreak II. And as much as I look at this question, I really think I should get the extra equipment.
I told him I'd be happy to help, but that I desperately needed some more equipment if I...
So they give me...
Smith and I went back down the...
Right. Let's see, I'm gonna say... let Smith take point, because I know there's no zombies in there.
Discretion is the better part of valor, so I let Smith take the lead. If this place was as dangerous as Ox made out, I didn't want to be at the front. On the other side of the door it was pitch black. If there were any windows, they were small, and the curtains or blinds were closed. We listened carefully for any signs of the infected, but heard nothing.
Now, I'm gonna try and go back and find a torch.
I wasn't about to get eaten in the dark, so I told Smith to wait while I went and found a torch. The rest of the area had been a storeroom after all, so I hoped there might just be a torch tucked away somewhere. I was in luck. The torch was small, but it offered enough illumination for us to see our way to the generator. We reached the generator. Smith promptly pulled a lever and pressed a few buttons. Apparently getting the thing up and running was as simple as that, because it immediately sprang to life. The lights in the room flashed and came on, and just in time. Our activities had disturbed a small group of infected who had been lurking in a side room, and they were now rushing toward us. I opened fire and was easily able to gun the bastards down. I breathed a sigh of relief and turned to Smith, but to my horror he was lying on the floor, bleeding heavily. In the confusion I had accidentally shot him in the leg.
I used the first aid kit last time, so I didn't realize I was trying to get
I knew Smith didn't have a lot of time, so I quickly removed the shoelace from one of his boots and tied it tightly to his leg, just above the wound. It wasn't much, but it seemed to slow the bleeding. I helped him to his feet, and we headed back to the group. When we reached the stairwell, we were greeted by a terrifying noise. All the gunfire earlier, and now the bright lights of the mall had attracted a large group of... I seriously regretted that I had not done more to barricade this part of the building. As I climbed in...
Alright, let me try and agree without question.
I didn't seem to have much choice, so I agreed to his demands. I was then informed that I'd be taking a mechanic named Smith along with me, partly to fix the generator if it needed it, and partly to make sure I didn't try anything stupid. Smith and I went back down the escalator and through the door I had originally...
I'll try busting on in.
If the infected were inside, I wanted to surprise and kill them before they could react. I kicked the door open and charged in. On the other side of the door it was pitch black. If there were any windows, they were... I was convinced that there were no infected in the room, and I also was sure there had to be a window somewhere. I told Smith that we should just go in and try to find it. He didn't like the plan though, and decided to wait outside. I laughed at his cowardice and continued regardless. The room was much bigger than I expected, and as I wandered around without any light, I inevitably bumped into things. Something fell down and made a loud metallic ringing noise as it hit the ground. It sealed my doom. The noise had disturbed a small group of infected, and as I stumbled in the dark, they pounced, tearing me limb from limb. As I clung...
So, looking for the curtains was a bad idea. And it doesn't make any sense to not... What if I refuse?
I didn't come all this way, risking my life again and again, just to be ordered around by a 2-bit wannabe gangster with a stupid fake name. And I told him so. Then he shot me.
Okay, well... we get the extra
Smith and...
bit. I'm gonna bust on it. If I can find a torch.
Weird. waste of good ammunition to kill him. I left him to die alone. When I reached the stairwell, I was greeted by a terrifying noise. All the gunfire earlier, and one of the bright lights of the mall had attracted a large group of infected who were trying to get in any way they could. I seriously regretted that I had not done more.
All I have is one more option.
On the other... Weird.
And that's to kill him.
I didn't think he was going to make it, and it was too dangerous here to spend time trying to save him. I shot him right between the eyes and put him out of his misery. When I reached the stairwell, I was greeted by a terror...
Yeah, okay. I have to give up. I've tried everything. Survived the day? No. Got the antibiotic? No. Tactics rank C. You have some basic survival skills and know a few things about zombies. However, you'd be unlikely to last long in a real outbreak. Rank C. You were once a kind person, but the outbreak has forced you to become somewhat self-centered. Well, I only killed the guy because, looks fun. Anyway, I might try that later. But, the only reason I killed him is because I couldn't think of anything else to do.
June 20.
So, let me skip ahead here and try and, take the shot right here. I'm just gonna go.
I couldn't face saying goodbye. The mission would be hard enough as it was, without the thoughts of my dying wife playing on my mind. I needed to keep a clear head and focus solely on the task at hand. Besides, she'd only worry if she knew I was leaving. I picked up my bags and headed for the gate.
Okay, I need to get the bicycle. And then I'm going to sneak past him.
Having
Right, lock the crowbar. Smash the crowbar. Search for a first aid kick. This is lock. First lock the door and then barricade it. Actually lock the door. Let's lock the door and barricade it, because I still feel like I might need it as a emergency exit, but you know what, I'm just gonna lock the door with bolts.
I closed the bolts on the door. They looked solid enough, and I didn't feel the need to waste time reinforcing the door further.
Darn it. I wonder if that was the bad
Now,
one. Let's see here. And then searching for supplies is useless.
I carefully explored the various side rooms, making sure that none of the infected had made a home here. Fortunately, this part of the building was empty, but I soon realized that some of the rooms posed a serious problem for security. Several of the windows had been smashed in the chaos following the outbreak. Since I didn't have the time or resources to block up every one, I instead closed all the interior doors and wedged chairs under the handles. I climbed the
Take cover.
I immediately the pillar up.
Trying to negotiate. Told her to save them. And as for extra equipment,
Smith and
I'll open the door slowly. Get back to the torch.
we reached.
Use the first aid
I
kit.
knew Smith didn't have a lot of time, so I quickly removed the first aid kit from my backpack and got to work. I used a tourniquet to staunch the bleeding and then bandaged the wound. It wasn't much, but it was the best I could do. I helped him to his feet, and we headed back to the group.
I might have to just
When we reached the stairwell, we were greeted by a terrifying...
Yeah, I should have. My earlier efforts to barricade the building had slowed the infected down. Okay, cool, but not nearly enough. A few of them had made their way inside, which again I was forced to fight my way for my life. I was only just able to gun them down. I knew that so many more would be.
By the time we got back to the group, they were already celebrating. Now the power was back on and they were focused on making the most of it while it lasted. Several had gotten one of the coffee shops up and running and were busy preparing hot food and drinks. Others were setting up a games console to entertain themselves while not on guard duty. Knowing about the threat from downstairs, it wasn't particularly reassuring. Smith had lost a lot of blood and was barely conscious when we arrived. Once I told him he had been shot, not bitten, Ox ordered some of the few women among the survivors to take care of him.
Get a cup of coffee. We should really warn them of the danger.
There was no time to relax. The infected would be inside very soon, and if we weren't prepared, we'd be overrun in minutes. Before I could even finish explaining the situation, Ox was barking orders at his men, getting them into the best position to deal with the threat. They were only just in time. Suddenly, the basement door burst open, and a seemingly unstoppable horde of infected zombies charged through. The first wave was gunned down before they reached the escalator, but more and more of them just kept on coming. Every gun in the building was blazing while survivors armed with clubs and axes struggled to keep the tide of monsters from climbing the stairs. I had no idea if we'd be able to fight them off or not.
I don't usually bring this up, but there's two mistakes this guy did. First of all, he said particularly twice in a screen back or two, and in this one he said a seemingly unstoppable horde, which is correct when you say it, but it wrote seemingly unstoppably. Horde. Let's see. I'm gonna run for the pharmacy.
I knew there was no way we'd be able to fight off the infected horde. My thoughts turned once again to my dying wife, and I realized that this might be my last chance to secure the antibiotics she so desperately needed. While the others held the infected at bay, I ran as fast as I could for the pharmacy. It took me less than a minute to reach the former drugstore. It had been totally untouched by looters, and all the various medicines were readily available. I could still hear the battle raging behind me, and I knew that I didn't have much time. Unfortunately, I wasn't alone. It seemed that the infected had found another way into the building, and several of them were now shambling straight toward me. I dashed towards the counter and jumped behind it, hoping that the infected wouldn't be able to find me and would be distracted by the other survivors. Of course, my ill-considered plan failed miserably. As I lay behind a counter, a gnarled, infected claw grabbed my ankle and dragged me out into the open. I went for my gun, but it was too late. The zombie had already taken a massive chunk out of leg. I knew I'd soon be one of the infected, so I quickly turned the gun on myself and pulled the trigger.
He said out of leg, but he meant out of my leg. That's funny.
By the time we got back to the group, they were already...
I want to get back to where I was. One of the danger. Run to the pharmacy. That's a shutter system.
They sprang immediately into action, jumping up to grab the bottom of the heavy iron shutters and pulling them down before the infected could get inside. I was only just in time. Had I have taken just one more second to lock them in place, I would have been devoured for sure. Now that I had the luxury of time, I thoroughly searched the pharmacy for the antibiotics I needed. I filled my backpack with as much of the stuff as I could, and then made my way out of the shop through the back door. I found myself in some sort of staff-only area that would normally have been off-limits to the general public. There were corridors leading to various offices and storage areas behind the back of the shops, but I had no time for sightseeing. I followed the signs and headed straight for the stairs. As I turned a corner, I heard a scream and the sounds of a struggle. One of the female survivors had also tried to make an escape, but had been ambushed by one of the infected. She had dropped her pistol and was now struggling to keep the monster from biting her.
Shoot them both is an option, but I'm out of ammo. I wonder if I can take her gun. I'm gonna try and wrestle the zombie off of her, since I have the crowbar. This is probably gonna kill me.
I couldn't get a clean shot at the zombie, so I resorted to wrestling the creature off of her. Amazingly, my plan worked, and I was able to drag the infected away from the poor girl, allowing her to grab her gun and make her escape. Unfortunately, during the struggle, the beast managed to bite my arm, and even though I eventually managed to smash its skull on a fire extinguisher, I was still doomed. As I slowly succumbed to the infection, I felt a slight twinge of pride. I had sacrificed myself for the life of another. By the time...
Man.
There was no...
I'm gonna get back to where I was. For the pharmacy. Close the shutters. Alright. Steal her gun and ammo?
The bitch...
I didn't mean to skip that. She was probably gonna die anyway, and certainly wouldn't need her gun in the afterlife after the pistol that left her to her feet. That's terrible.
As I reached the stairwell, I became all too aware that the sound of gunfire, a constant companion for the last few minutes, had suddenly stopped. Had the survivors fought off the infected, or had they all been wiped out? I had no way of knowing either way.
Well, the power's working, so I should be able to take the elevator, but usually in zombie movies you're not supposed to take elevators. So,
I pressed the button and waited for the elevator. It seemed to take far longer to arrive than normal, and as I waited, the sounds of the infected drew nearer and nearer. Finally, the door slid open, and only just in time. The infected had just burst into the hallway and were now charging toward me. The door shut with only a few moments to spare, and I immediately pressed the button for the roof. I cursed my stupidity and laziness as the elevator slowly ascended.
What? I figured it would be much safer than going up the stairs.
I stepped out into the open air and breathed a sigh of relief. I was on the top level of a multi-story car park which seemed to be blessedly free of zombies. There were also plenty of parked cars in relatively good condition, perfect for a swift and safe ride home. I suddenly noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. I span round and took aim, expecting it to be one of the infected. To my relief and surprise, it was a handful of survivors who had managed to escape the carnage downstairs. Before I could meet up with them, something leaped at me from the shadows, knocking my gun from my hands and nearly pushing me to the floor. I regained my balance just in time to defend myself from the creature's next assault. By the neck with both hands. Realizing he'd be unable to bite me, I pushed him back with all my might, forcing him toward the railings. It took every ounce of strength that I had remaining, but I managed to shove the infected bastard over the edge. A few seconds later, I heard a sickening splat as his body hit the ground. Now that the immediate danger had been dealt with, I had to decide how best to get back to the ground floor. As I picked up my gun, I took another look around. There were plenty of parked cars that I could steal, and the other survivors had already begun hot-wiring an SUV.
I should probably steal a car. I wonder if I should join the other survivors. Let me steal a car from you.
I smashed the back window on one of the healthier-looking cars and crawled inside. Luckily, the previous owner had left a set of keys hidden in the glove compartment.
That's amazing.
running through the car park, I realized just how fortunate I had been. The place was crawling with infected, and there was no way I could have escaped on foot. I sped out of the car park, breaking through the wooden barrier and skidding out onto the main road. I chose the most direct route I could think of back toward the compound, and drove as fast as I could. I didn't get far though. Not more than 2 blocks down the street, I came across the remains of a serious traffic accident. Several vehicles blockaded the road.
I know that this isn't gonna work, but I'm gonna try it.
I knew that getting out of the car unnecessarily could easily prove fatal. I slowed down to a safe speed and gently pushed the other cars out of the way. As I expected, the previous owners had not bothered to put the brakes on before abandoning their vehicles, so it was relatively easy to move them. It took a few minutes of careful maneuvering and seriously dented the front of my ride, but I was eventually able to clear a path.
Oh, fantastic.
As I looked down the road ahead of me, I realized that making my escape might not be as easy as I first thought. A huge mob of infected assembled on the street ahead.
Run them over.
I put my foot on the gas and accelerated directly into the crowd. The first few bodies I hit bounced off the windshield and rolled clean over the vehicle, leaving only a few large cracks and blood splats as evidence of their demise. As I mowed down more and more of them, I began to lose speed dramatically. Body parts began to get clogged around the wheel arches, and the tires lost traction in the blood and gore. Soon the vehicle was practically at a standstill, in the middle of a seemingly endless sea of infected. The creatures that had avoided serious injuries now began hammering on the windows, which soon gave way. I was grabbed by countless pairs of claw-like hands and dragged out of the vehicle. I had no chance.
Wow.
I stepped up.
Show the railings.
Now,
I'm trying to get back to where I was. Steal the power.
I spit
Shut them out of the way.
as I
Turn off down a back
I
road.
was
I wasn't going to risk driving through a ravenous horde of infected unnecessarily. I turned off down a small brick road and took another route back to the compound. It was a little more time consuming, but a lot less
I
suicide.
finally made it out of the town and back to the countryside. The sun was setting in the distance behind me. I had been through a lot that day and was glad that I would soon be reunited with my loving wife. Just when I thought I was out of danger, the engine began to make strange clunking noises. I prayed that it would last until I got home, but God didn't seem to be listening. I knew I had no hope of fixing the problem, and it was far too dangerous to waste time trying. The compound was only an hour's walk or so away, so I abandoned the vehicle and resolved to carry on foot.
I walked all the way there to be
After a long and terrifying walk through the gloom of twilight, I finally arrived back at my father-in-law's compound. I was mentally and physically exhausted, and wanted nothing more than to crawl in bed, cuddle up to my wife, and fall into a deep sleep. I was expecting a far warmer welcome than I received. Despite my heroic efforts on their behalf, the guards wisely insisted that I prove I hadn't been bitten before being allowed in. Once more I had to strip down to my skin to show that I would remain among the living. With the formalities over and done with, I was finally allowed inside. As soon as the gates were safely closed behind, my father-in-law ran out from the farmhouse and uncharacteristically gave me a hug. Then he asked me about the medicine. I smiled and showed him the contents of my backpack. I had secured enough antibiotics to treat everyone who lived in the compound, myself included. We wasted no time in delivering them to everyone who needed it. Over the course of the next few days, the compound began to recover. With the exception of the 2 worst cases, everyone survived the illness and were soon back on their feet. Most importantly of all, I had saved my beautiful wife yet again.
Cool. Oh, this is a lot better than what I got before. Tactics Tactics rank A, you have a solid understanding of zombie outbreaks, and your survival skills are far above average. You'd probably survive a real outbreak. Compassion rank B, even in the living hell, you try your best to do the right thing, although it's not always possible to save everyone. Fun, fun, fun. That was fun. Cool. If you guys want me to try that again, but maybe take a different route, let me know. Or you guys play it. What do you guys think of it?